Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. It's a big privilege, and very excited too. So I'll run through this very fast, and before I start, I want to establish kind of a thought on UX in general, which is going to be a bit about this talk. And in a way, UX was practiced, before it had a name and before it was a profession. The great composers, they were doing UX. They were composing these fantastic symphonies. People would come to concert halls and go through a very powerful experience. Engineers of the past, Engelbart did this, invented the mouse more than 50 years ago, which affected how we use computers and brought computers into the lives of so many people, which otherwise may have had a much more difficult time doing it. And of course, Apple, which is going to be an example of a few things I'm going to show, but Apple startup sound, which sounded like this. Do we have sound? I think, okay. Let's go back. Do we have? Well, Apple startup sound, it's a very short moment in the use of a new computer. You buy a new computer, you take it out of the box, you connect it, and the first time you open it, it plays that sound. And that's an experience moment that touches you with very little significance to the functional purpose of this computer. So we mentioned this a bit, and we'll jump a bit forwards to how UX has become a profession, and a profession with methodologies and books and conferences like this, and which look very closely at every step that a user takes, and we like to think that we're doing this very complex and clever thing with defining and analyzing things. So user experience, in a way, if you look at this phrase, and we kind of take out the word experience and look at it, experience is something that reflects emotion and feeling and something that happens in our mind and something that we, that affects how we behave or even our mood. And this has become something that's been occupying our industry, and the wonderful Jesse Garrett, almost 15 years ago, mapped out the different elements that affect experiences, what causes us to experience something, and all these factors were mapped out in this kind of chart, and this kind of woke up this kind of different angles of looking at user experience and all the things that affect it, and all the things that build up eventually this thing that affects feeling and affects emotions of people. This is another nice example by, I think, Oliver Reichenstein from IA, and he kind of mapped out all these factors and placed the user experience in the middle as being the thing that is affected by so many things together. Another example, I'll run through these fast and we'll jump to the next thing soon. Dan Saffer, I think, was mentioned in her talk before. He looked at the disciplines, the different professions that affect user experience. And when you look at this, you can see, engineering and sound design and motion design. And it kind of makes you think that user experience is actually affected by everything. And in a way, it's true. It's the way a receptionist answers the phone. It's the way the lights or the sounds are in a restaurant. And so if user experience is affected by so many factors and there's so many maps, maybe we should try to look a bit through the user's perspective and think, what's the constant thing that keeps all the user experience factors into a single place? And to mention this, something that we know, users can experience something very powerfully, but they don't always know what made them experience this. And for an example, luxury cars actually employ sound designers to make sense of how the door of the car sounds when it shuts. Users don't know to look for it. Nobody would say, oh, I love this car, listen to the door. But they do, it does affect them, and it affects them in the same way that other experiences do. So this is what I want to talk today. I want to try and look at user experience from a formula angle, from a way that breaks it down to the key ingredients that maybe is similar to all the experiences that we have and encounter. And the formula looks like this. Expectation multiplied by friction needs to be smaller than the value to become a successful experience. And we know that when we multiply two things, they obviously grow a lot. So this is kind of a challenge to keep this kind of formula balanced. So to explain this, expectation is what a user expects. It could be a brand, it could be a price. I paid a lot for something, I expect more. It could be something I was told, a review, an advertising, PR, a package. The friction is pretty obvious, and that's the effort needed to get value from something. And it could be filling a form, it could be reading, it could be load time of a page, it could be a device that I need to use, and it could be the way I use it. And the value is pretty obvious, and that's what I get in return, which could be knowledge, could be a job, could be social empowerment, could be love. So let's take this kind of hypothetical formula and try throwing it on different products and different interfaces that I've collected, and we'll try to run, as much as the time will allow, so we'll try to run through as many as we can. So here's an example, first example. This is actually a gallery. I'm failing to give credit to whoever did it. I just know his name is Stephen. So Stephen did a fantastic job with showing the gallery of the city of Hong Kong over a period of a full day. So what do we expect? We expect a gallery. What's a gallery? It's one of those things that you click back and forth and it changes the images. Friction of using it, we know the friction, clicking something, not a big deal. The value, well, the value is seeing a set of images. And the way that Stephen did this is he used the movement of the cursor to go up and down on the image, and when you go down, the image kind of shows you the night. When you go up, it shows you back the day. And if we look at our formula, what this means, expectation, well, I didn't expect this. Friction kind of reduced because I just have to move my mouse. Value is kind of higher because I also get the timestamp of this occasion. So our formula works on this thing, and it means this is a good experience. Expectation, let's look at the expectation from a specific angle. Again, I'm apologizing for showing Apple. Before the iPhone was launched, everybody was excited about the new Apple phone. And a lot of images were kind of leaked to the internet claiming this is going to be the new Apple phone. And users expected it to look like this, or like this, even like this. I wonder who'd want to use this. And even like these examples, which at the time were quite interesting, these looked like very attractive phones that you'd want to use. And so these were the expectations. This is what users expected from the iPhone. And what happened was this thing. And this thing was way beyond the expectation. Friction was incredibly lower because you could now swipe, wipe, touch, pinch, and do everything with less effort. And the value, the value was incredible because you could now browse the internet. I don't know if you remember the feature phones, the Nokia little joystick that you jump with your cursor to try and browse something, and the second you clicked it, it kind of shifted and clicked something else. So suddenly there was a lot, bigger value in this and a bigger screen. So if we look at our formula, this in fact appears to be a fantastic experience. And to prove this experience, this is a queue in Ginza, Tokyo, for the launch of one of the iPhones. And actually, this is not the longest queue. It's the shortest one for this presentation that I could find. And people were very engaged and enlightened with setting their hands on this new product. Now, if we look at, if we still look at our formula and we're looking at the iPhone 7 that's due to launch sometime soon, how does this look through our formula? Well, MacRumors, which is a site that exposes a lot of the predicted activity of Apple, predicts that the new iPhone would look like this, and it says that there's going to be no headphone jack, which, okay, is this good or bad? Is this friction or value? Dual lens camera, which means maybe I'll be able to take 3D images or VR images of videos, which is kind of questionable because, the panorama feature in the phone? Anybody used it? Anybody ever used it? Anybody used it more than 5 times in the past year? There's 3 people. Well, it's kind of a feature that we wonder whether it has value behind it. Similar to iPhone 6, well, that's not exceeding expectations. redesigned antenna bands. I'm sure everybody was waiting for that one. Upgraded processor, well, kind of expected because phones become faster from each generation. And 2 screen sizes which already exist. So I'm wondering that if this indeed is going to be what the iPhone 7 is going to propose, would this be that successful experience that people are going to be so enlightened about and stand in line to get it? So let's continue and throw our formula on different examples. And before we do, I want to mention an important point, and that's the important point. And the important point claims that, features increase value. The more features we have, the more we can do. But they also require an interface for delivering them. And that inevitably requires friction. And we'll wrap up with this sentence again because it kind of sums up what I'm talking about. So just a few examples. We all know this cable TV, satellite TV remote, and it makes you wonder, why would anybody do this? And not only wonder, because I'm sure that the person who did this doesn't use most of the features that actually introduce you, and that's a lot of friction. And the way, the way users responded was by this. This is called the grandma-proof remote, and this is somebody hiding all these features for their grandma. And there's a lot of these on the web because this is trying to improve her experience or avoiding damaging it. And Apple did again, sorry about Apple. Apple did a great job with their Apple TV remote, the previous version, by understanding this and reducing this friction. Another example, eBay. eBay is arguably one of the most successful marketplaces. And if we're trying to look at eBay through a formula, there's a lot of friction in eBay. Expectation is pretty clear. I want to get a good deal. I want to sell something I would finding difficulty to find a buyer. And all these links and dots and indicators and red and blue and yellow, all these add up to a lot of friction that really requires a lot of effort in order to get a value that I'm kind of expecting. So why is eBay so successful? If our formula works, then eBay should be questionable. And the reason that eBay is successful because of an additional factor that is added up here, and that's motivation. And motivation is what kind of reduces, in a way, friction. And if we put it in our formula, maybe it should look like this. Expectations multiplied by friction reduced from, motivation reducing the friction should be smaller than the value. And it should be mentioned that over time, we get used to things and we know how to use them. And that kind of reduces friction, which is, I think, what made eBay kind of overcome this barrier. So let's run through some sort of random examples for different things and check if our formula kind of works with them. And the first one, of course, is search engines. At the time, the beginning of the internet, this is what search engines looked like. And that was Alta Vista and Lycos and Yahoo. And the reason they look like this is because they assume that users don't know what they don't know and don't know how to ask for it. And they decided to provide all these links. And this, in fact, is quite a lot of friction, but this was kind of the expected interface. And in came Google. And what Google did was, first of all, was exceed expectations. Nobody expected this frictionless interface. Reduce friction, of course, and increase the value by giving the results better and faster. And this accounts for something that maybe marks the ingredient for making Google so successful. Another example, Soundhound, similar to Shazam. Everybody knows those programs. They listen to music that is played in the background and tell you which song it is. So why is this so successful? I think the reason this is a successful experience, first of all, because it's always exceeding expectations. You're always a little bit surprised when it manages to find the song you're listening in the background. And if you turn it to landscape, it actually gives you the lyrics in a karaoke kind of way. So it gives you a lot of value. And friction-wise, it's just one button that you click. You don't need to do anything, and there's just one button on the screen. By the way, today, this is kind of an older version. The newer versions, you don't even have to do anything. It runs in the background, and it finds the songs on its own. So this needs to be marked as a good experience. Another one, dating sites. Dating sites, well, we can agree that the motivation is very high. I want to find the love of my life, and the best way to find the love of your life is on the internet where there's so many people. And it requires me to invest a lot of effort. I need to fill in a lot of forms about myself to be able to make a better match. But there's a lot of hidden friction in this, because not only do I need to fill a form, but now I need to also make a decision. This kind of resonates with Adrian's talk about decision making. And especially, I think the biggest difficulty in this one is the weight. I think that's where users struggle the most, where they have to sit and write their true weight. And I'm sure that some users are actually looking at this drop-down and wondering, or this field and wondering, okay, what will I write this time? Well, I'm going to lose weight, so I might as well, And to counteract that, that's kind of Tinder, which reduced all the friction. You don't need to fill in a form. You don't need to take any decisions. You just need to say like, don't like, and you flip back and forwards until, ta-da, there's a match, and that's your love of your life. We'll jump through this one to move forwards. This is another example of the Weather Channel app, which is one of the most successful weather applications with huge amounts of users. And this, in fact, is a very valuable interface. It gives a lot of information about the weather. And in a way, maybe it's a bit like that remote that we saw, because out there came a product called Umbrella. And what Umbrella does, it just tells you a simple answer to the question, which is what you probably ask is, do I need to take an umbrella, and what is the temperature? And in fact, they've reduced the friction so low that you don't even need to open the app. It already appears on the notification you get every morning when you wake up. So this, again, fits in our formula in a good way and proves to be a good experience. Captchas is another good experience. I'm sure you'll know that when you try to type a captcha and you get some kind of a sequence that isn't clear, it takes you a lot of time to type a single word. You keep looking back and forwards and making sure you don't make a mistake. And suddenly you realize that numbers is a much smaller friction to add a captcha. And then there's this sweet captcha product that, the reason for Captchas is to make sure that whoever's answering it is a human and not a computer, not a bot. So what they did is they give you a simple question, drag the salt to the popcorn, something a computer wouldn't know how to do, and that's something you would need to put a lot of effort, and the friction is reduced. Google Glass, that's a big question. Why was this not successful? I'm wondering what made this kind of fail, temporarily maybe. And I think the reason it is because the expectations were incredibly high. The friction was, the value was apparently much lower than expected, and the friction was kind of elusive, because when you put glasses on you, it's kind of a statement on your personality. So it's a lot of friction in deciding that this will be the glasses that I'm going to be using, and kind of makes you wonder whether this is where the friction actually was evoked. Do-it-yourself is always Facebook, we're losing time, so I'm going to jump quickly. Facebook, I think, understood something about this friction instinctively, because MySpace, which at the time was the equivalent, required you to build your own page, which seems like a good idea. Express yourself, design your own page that reflects you. Facebook took that burden away, and I think that gave an easier and a smoother way of succeeding. And not only that, if you remember when Facebook introduced the covers, this was a moment that users suddenly had the burden of adding a cover, and that was a point of friction. But motivation already was high at the time. The like, again, it's a smoothest way of participating without having to write something. Writing something is friction. We'll jump through this one. It's quite a nice example. But this is Microsoft Word, previous versions, great value, lots of features, fantastic thing. This funny product is a recipe computer done in the 70s by Honeywell, and you'd pay $10,000 for a computer that would sit in your kitchen and would show you the recipes for cooking on a single line, and you'd need to go through 3 weeks of training to master this. And I can't think of anything more absurd than this, but this is the kind of friction balance that we're talking about. This is something that I think most of you know. When you go to the ticket machines at subways, especially in cities you've never visited before, there's a terrible moment of friction. There's that moment where you're trying to understand what goes on this thing. People behind you are waiting in line, and you're kind of lost. And that's a bad experience as far as our formula goes. And by the way, this is one of the first pop-ups. If you click help, you get a pop-up, and solves all your problems. This is another example, we'll jump through these ones. It's quite an interesting thing on how things moved from our wrist to our pockets and back to our wrist because of the way friction works. And sometimes the value is questionable, because this toaster probably costs more, doesn't make a better toast. but gives you some kind of an emotional thing, which is a topic that we won't get to talk about today. And if you'll catch me later, then we can chat about this moment where things become very powerful and emotional. So this is kind of a formula to look at user experience a bit from the way that it affects us as opposed to the way that the ingredients are kind of, the elements are kind of spread out. And it doesn't, I'm not touching the things that actually make us really moved and stand in line for a day, like the apple, but there's also the formula that works in there. And to wrap up a conversation and sort of bottom lines of what I wanted to talk to you about is the following. A good experience, I'm missing a word here, a good experience relies on balance. And if this equation is balanced, then there's a successful experience probable. And reducing friction is mostly in our hands. Leveling expectations is something that is usually beyond our reach, which is why maybe when we produce something, and it was mentioned, the MVP was mentioned a couple of times today, whether we look at those occasions through the eyes of the user and the friction and the impact of friction that affects him. And powerful and emotional experiences happen when there's a really strong sort of favor for the value as opposed to the experience, the expectation, and the friction needed to use it. A point to mention as well, users may be surprisingly tolerant to lack of features. If you remember mentioning the iPhone, the first iPhone had a battery that lasted 2 hours, and if it dropped, it broke, which is something that was unheard of at the time. Nokia phones, you could throw them in the wall. Somebody mentioned a quote that in 1,000 years, societies will find an old Nokia phone buried underground, and it would still have a 50% battery. And so this is kind of tolerance that users tend to bend with the way the equation works for them. And to wrap it up, I'm going to sort of tell you the key to happiness. This is going to change your life. And the key to happiness is low expectations. Thank you. Questions?
So, can you come up with examples where increased friction can lead to a better user experience as well?
Can I hear?
So, do you also have examples where the increase of friction, so more friction, will lead to a better user experience? Because that's basically what gamification and stuff often does. It increases friction to make it more challenging to solve a problem, to make me feel better about it.
Well, then you're not increasing friction. You're actually increasing the value, and you're turning the friction to something that's fun or gratifying, which doesn't make it friction. It makes it kind of a value. And I'm kind of bending the rules to make this work, but it's a perspective issue. It's whether the friction is something that burdens you or whether it's something that you actually enjoy doing, even if it's an effort. And if it is, it isn't friction. It's kind of fun and value. Thank you.